Thanks again for joining us for our virtual forum today, Emerging Drug Trends, Kratom, Tianeptine, and Other Gray Market Substances. We are pleased to introduce our presenter today, one of BrightView's medical directors, Dr. Gilbert Schmidt.
Thank you for that introduction. Welcome, everyone. It's really my pleasure to be in front of you today and talk about these important topics. And I think the fact that you all are here today and I'm here again is a testimony to the interest in our field and this topic, as our last meeting filled up and exceeded the limit of WebEx. So that's why we're all here together. So I'm looking forward to doing it again. I know that we have an hour together and I don't want to waste your time with my bio, but I do want to say a couple things about this. You'll notice from there, I've been in healthcare quite a long time, several decades, had a varied career until I found addiction medicine, or did addiction medicine find me? I'm not quite sure. I'm still trying to answer that question. What I want to say about that, though, is that was when I had my Mark Twain moment. And Mark Twain, a great American, said to us that the most important day of your life is the day you're born. The second most important day is the day you find out why. And professionally speaking, I found my why 11 years ago when I became an addiction medicine specialist. I love everything about what this group, what I do, and what everyone on this call does, helping this patient population that desperately needs us, that's so disregarded by the rest of the healthcare system and by America in general. And the second thing I want to say is thank you. I have incredible gratitude for all of you for what you do to help this patient population. It really makes me happy to be able to speak to you today, and I hope to live up to your expectations. Okay, let's not talk about me. No one wants to hear about me. Next slide, please. Okay, so today we're going to talk about these four substances off to the right: Kratom, Tianeptine, Phenibut, and DXM, or more commonly known as dextromethorphan. And I want you to be able, at the end of this, to be able to identify them, know something about them, especially their addiction and dependence potential, to sort of recognize how they present from a clinical and behavioral health manner, and think about more carefully of screening and treatment considerations, and then understand the regulatory and public safety implications of these substances. Okay, next one, please. So let's dive right into it with, I think, the reason most of us are on this call, which is Kratom. There's a lot of different ways you can pronounce the underlying chemical. It's probably mitragynine or something of it. I'm just going to call it Kratom. Interestingly, the word Kratom was originally spelled K-R-A-T-H-O-M. That's from the Thai language. And that's what this plant in Southeast Asia was and is called, is Kratom. So I'm typically going to just call it Kratom today. I'm not going to call it mitragynine, although that's the underlying chemical. It was anglicized to Kratom without the H. This plant is a member of the coffee family. It's indigenous to Southeast Asia, especially Cambodia, Thailand, Indonesia, among others. It's been used since the 19th century, primarily as a herbal medication. And it was in that way consumed from usually chewing the leaves, smoking sometimes them, but more than making tea. So usually chewing the leaves, putting it in the mouth, letting it sit in your mouth, or in tea. And it was used in these countries for work stamina and to help relieve fatigue and especially pain. It's kind of considered a folk remedy. Okay, next one, please. Okay, so let's just talk a little bit about this, if it's okay. I know many of you are not scientists or organic chemists, but I think you need to have access to exposure to some of the chemistry here. So the leaves of this plant that we call Kratom has 40 different alkaloids. What's an alkaloid? An alkaloid is a naturally occurring organic compound, meaning based in carbon. It has at least one nitrogen atom, and then it's alkaline in nature. It's in the pH spectrum. It's not acidic. It's alkaline, and thus the name alkaloids. It's one of a whole family of alkaloids. The more common ones you'll know are caffeine. Codeine is a naturally occurring opiate alkaloid. Nicotine, we all know, and morphine. Those are other common alkaloids. But this plant has 40 different versions of alkaloids, the most abundant of which is mitragynine, and it only accounts for 1 to 2% of the dried leaf content. Now, we're going to get pretty quickly into 7-hydroxymitragynine or 7-hydroxykratom, or most people just call it 7-OH now. And what I want to say on this slide is that 7-OH, that one of the products that causes problematic kratom use, is only in minuscule amounts in the leaves and probably only occurs as part of the drying process. In other words, if you took a leaf, off and put it in your mouth, you wouldn't really get any 7-OH. It's really not there. When you dry it and manipulate it, that's what happens. Now, here I said that it's 13 times more potent than the 7-OH is 13 times more potent than Kratom itself. It's actually somewhere between 10 and 40. We don't really know. But this byproduct compound is much more potent than the underlying one that's in Kratom. Now, when people consume Kratom, either by the leaf or in tea or in a more concentrated version in a capsule or a shot, it's very rapidly absorbed orally from the stomach. And we think about 20% of it is absorbed. That's what bioavailability means. It's that it's absorbed. The other passes on through. It lasts about 3 to 9 hours. That's its half-life, and it's excreted in the urine. Next slide, please. Okay, so chemically, what does this drug, mitragynine or Kratom, do? It's a partial agonist. An agonist is a drug that stimulates or activates the mu receptor. And I think all of us in this field are familiar with the mu receptor. It's a protein on nerve cells that's everywhere in our body, but especially in the brains, and that binds opioids, whether it's natural, synthetic, or semi-synthetic. And when this mu receptor is activated, typically what happens are a series of things. One, there's pain relief. There's often euphoria or sort of a psychologic effect or a high. And then repeated activation of this mu receptor by opioids causes tolerance, then dependence, and then overdose risk. And so this mu receptor is the target drug for other substances, both legal and illicit. So heroin, fentanyl, morphine, kratom, alkaloids, and other drugs we're going to talk about activate this mu receptor primarily in the brain. So with low doses, has pain relieving properties, mild euphoria, and then it's higher doses. The kratom causes sedation. And there is, interestingly, with kratom, a ceiling effect similar to Suboxone and buprenorphine. So more doesn't stop your breathing, you get more effects, but doesn't have an effect on breathing similar to buprenorphine. Now, this other drug we're going to talk about more, 7-OH or 7-hydroxy kratom or 7-hydroxymitragynine, is a very potent mu receptor agonist. Again, somewhere between 13 and 40 times the activation effect at the mu receptor from the underlying compound. This is really important, and we're going to talk about as we go through this. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, again, just to kind of summarize, low doses from the leaf, 1 to 5 grams. Interestingly, when this happens, it's a stimulant-like effect. It's adrenergic, so heart rate goes up, alertness increases, pain decreases, just more alert, get more work done in the same amount of time. You can understand why folks would use kratom leaves in this way. Moderate doses, again, from the leaf, from tea or others, again, it starts to have those analgesic, pain relieving, euphoria producing, and then an anxiolytic effect is an anxiety reducing effect. So the higher doses do all these other effects. And then when you get the really high doses, usually not from the simple product itself, but concentrated versions, then you get potent analgesic, pain relief, nausea, and drug dependence. That's where these things come in. All right, next slide, please. Let me make sure I get give me 1 second here to get caught up to you. Okay, so in 2022, the last data that we have on this, 1.9 million Americans reported use of kratom in the past year. And those folks who take kratom, you typically buy it in head shops, smoke shops, online. If you drive around your town, you'll see neon signs advertising kratom for sale. They do so, when they do so, they use to treat mood, pain, opioid withdrawal. And this all is from the data collected in 2022 from the National Survey on Drug Use and Health. So the market and industry source estimates are much higher than 2 million. And we think that there are 15 to 20 million Americans that have ever used kratom. And the problem comes in with the potency of the new products that are out there, these concentrated products of 7-hydroxy kratom, 7-hydroxymitragynine is a major concern. The kratom market is estimated to be $1 billion industry, and that was 4 years ago. And I'm quite sure that it's much higher today. Next one, please. Next slide, please. Okay, this is a picture of some of the products here for you. I've personally never purchased one, had it in my possession, but these I harvested online. Really, really interesting just to look at. The first one that struck me was the packaging for the Roxy. And that's really scary because Roxy is a street name for oxycodone pills. I think most of us that work in this field know that. Some of our patients refer to oxycodone as Roxy's. So that's interesting that, and I think sort of sinister actually, that manufacturers of Kratom products, especially the 7-OH ones, would formulate it in this way. This speaks to them understanding drug terminology in our patients. There's another one over here on the left, 7-hydroxymitragynine, advertised as such. The one on the bottom struck me too, skull and crossbones on it. That's kind of scary. But even the manufacturers have basically telling you that right here, this is dangerous right in front of you. But this is what these products look like as tablets, as shots. And this is what our patients are buying and consuming. Okay, next one, please. So here's what's important about this. These 7-OH products are formulated as highly concentrated isolates. So in some of them, instead of being the simple mitragynine, it's 60% pure 7-hydroxy with up to 13 to 40 times the effects of the underlying drug. This is in stark contrast to the kratom leaf, which has trace, if any, and it's really not detectable in fresh leaves. So these products are marketed as chewable tablets, gummies, shots, and they're advertised as kratom. Although I'm going to argue to you that they're not really any longer kratom. They have much higher alkaloid concentrations of a manipulated substance, and these concentrated and synthetic products represent a big shift in the market in the past couple of years. These 7-OH products have a marked increased risk for toxicity, for dependence that is almost indistinguishable from regular opioid dependence. And there's very little to minimal clinical research on the safety and regulation of these products. And so the pharmacological profile differs substantially from traditional kratom. So what if folks were buying in head shops and convenience stores where kratom leaves dried up and put in a capsule, or that would be one thing, but that's not what they're buying anymore. It's being labeled as kratom, but it's really not. It's something altogether different. And again, 30, a highly concentrated version of a very powerful drug. All right, next slide, please. Now, even that drug, even 7-hydroxy, has been manipulated further. It's a chemical rearrangement of the underlying 7-hydroxymitragynine molecule. And at this point, so the 7-hydroxy we would say is semi-synthetic. It's taken a natural molecule that occurs minimally changed with some drying. And now this is a fully synthetic chemicals, pseudo 7-hydroxy. And this is a extremely potent agonist at the mu receptor. It's not really clear about its potency at the mu receptor. It's felt to be similar, but it could likely be even much greater than 7-hydroxy. It's marketed as being stronger, but safer. That is absolutely not true. Has a much higher risk of respiratory depression, overdose, and death. And here's a picture of what these tabs look like here. It's openly advertised, 7 tabs, so 7-hydroxy and pseudo. And it says on there, more potent. You can see at the bottom, more potent. And one of the problems with these is naloxone is really probably not that effective. So if someone overdoses on these, you might have to give multiple repeated doses of naloxone to reverse a overdose. One interesting thing is that this particular drug, the pseudo, is explicitly excluded from something we're going to talk about in a minute. And that's the Kratom Consumer Protection Act language. And another important point we'll repeat here as we go on, that this is not, that this substance, both the 7-hydroxy and the pseudo, and even kratom 2 really, are not detected on standard immunoassays that we all do in our clinics and offices and our places of business and practice. Detecting all of these drugs takes special testing. We'll talk about that more in a minute, but this is one of the key points. You're not going to see this. It doesn't cross-react with the other immunoassay tests. So it's basically invisible to testing to us out in the field in the real world where our patients live today. Next slide, please. Lindsay, no, let me say it works poorly. So if someone overdoses on pseudo or 7-hydroxy, it's just like with fentanyl or carfentanil. It doesn't work great. Give it to them and keep giving it to them. So it works, but it works. The answer is partially. It works, but poorly. Okay. So even now, 7-hydroxymitragynine is being manipulated by chemists. This is one of the striking things about our field, is that our drug testing and understanding of these do not keep up with the chemists in the field. So there are other synthetically derived compounds that have been manipulated to be much more potent than its parent. And two of them are here, MGM-15 and MGM-16. MGM-15 began to appear just last year as a research chemical in online vendor listings and markets. And it was first described about a decade ago, but it's starting to appear online as a research chemical. And what that means is that if you're really determined, you can get your hands on it. You can purchase these research chemicals through sketchy sources. I'm not sure how that works exactly. I'm not even sure I want to know, but this drug is thought to even have greater mu receptor affinity than 7-hydroxykratom. There is zero pharmacologic safety data on these. The clinical effects, the risks, the toxicology on these new products, MGM-15, MGM-16, are unknown. They're not FDA approved. They're not federally scheduled. They're nothing. These are invisible. And this is another area government and regulators are not able to keep up with chemists and their manipulation of these compounds. So this is probably out there. It's so new, by the way, it's really less than a year old that it doesn't even have a street name yet. So the others have pseudo and 7-hydroxy, MGM-15 and MGM. They'll come up with a name here. I bet next year we'll probably have a colloquial street name for these drugs, but they don't right now. Next slide, please. Okay, what about lab testing? This is a sad but true point, is that standard workplace and drug tests aren't going to help us here. They don't test for mitragynine. They don't test for the synthetic derived versions. That's a sad truth that we have to all grasp and wrap our minds around, especially when things don't add up. They won't show up in our routine immunoassay toxicology. Now, forensic and clinical labs that use chromatography in one form or mass spec techniques can confirm these substances if they're set up to do so. So the sensitive methods can also detect these in blood, urine, and hair, but this is a forensic thing, a sort of a public health thing. We're not going to really have access to this. Even in our practice in BrightView, we have mass spec testing we can do for Kratom, but not for the newer compounds. So this is going to be an ongoing huge problem. If you simply need or want to do confirmatory testing for Kratom, one of the questions we've gotten is, what does it cost? And the answer is somewhere between $150 and $400. There are expanded panels that include it for $200 to $600, but it's not inexpensive. Hair or blood confirmation can be obtained for $300 to $800 if you're in the criminal justice system, but this depends heavily on the lab, the turnaround time, whether it's a standalone order, part of a broader toxicology panel, So it's significantly more testing than routine drug screens, obviously. This is very complicated and difficult to do. Hospital, commercial reference labs may do it. National Medical Services, Quest, LabCorp might offer these tests, and you're going to have to provide clinical justification and then figure out, who's going to pay for it and what that's all about. So this is very, very stressful. There is no typically available point of hospital, point of care, clinic, ED testing for these substances, although I assume that this is being worked on behind the scenes, but I'm not really sure. So the gold testing for these alkaloids will be confirmatory formal testing. And again, even in BrightView, we test for mitragynine for Kratom, but not for these other substances, 7-hydroxy or pseudo. We don't currently test for those. So this is going to be a big challenge going forward. Next slide, please. How does Kratom dependence present? There's a little bit of a difference between Kratom. This isn't a really excellent question. This slide is an answer to a question. The short answer is that there's not really a reliable, unique presenting set of symptoms. However, there is a recognizable pattern that might be able to help you if you suspect it or you know what to look for. So big picture, Kratom dependence presents like opioid-like withdrawal. It has some stimulant antidepressant-like energy, mood, focus effects. And then we think that it may have more psychoactive effects than opioids. So frequently reported symptoms are anxiety, irritability, depression, emotional ability, brain fog, sedation, dysphoria, sometimes agitation, sometimes paranoia. But opioid dependence and withdrawal can do these too. So there's a huge overlap. There's no clear presentation for kratom dependence. And I think what I can say about it is that patients who become addicted to it report daily or near daily use with redosing and redosing. And some of these patients spend just unbelievable amounts of money purchasing and redosing themselves on kratom. I've heard of people spending, just like opiates, hundreds of dollars a day and taking it multiple times throughout the day. Supposedly, the withdrawal from kratom is not as bad as opiates, but longer. The duration lasts over a week, and it's variable in its terms of its severity. And as I said before, neuropsychiatric symptoms are more prominent. So here's the key that I want to say on this slide and to you to take away. Because the testing is going to be negative, this is going to be your big key. So someone who presents with an opioid dependence picture, opioid withdrawal, who has negative testing, whether confirmatory or immunoassay, this is when you should start to say, something might be going on here. Most, but not all patients dependent on kratom will tell you. We've seen this in our clinics and learned this the hard way, that patients often perceive kratom as being natural and a supplement, and therefore it's not disclosed. Sometimes they don't even really understand that it's the kratom that you just really have to kind of dig around, and you find out later that they're on kratom. They don't tell you. We've also had patients, for example, who came in for alcohol use disorder and were given naltrexone, only to find out that we made them very sick because they were also taking kratom. They didn't tell us. They didn't think it was necessary, and so they were actually simultaneously opioid dependent, and obviously giving them naltrexone makes them very sick. So we've seen that happen too. And I think what I want to say about this is that we have to move beyond relying on testing to relying on talking, and that screening for supplements, especially kratom and other substances like that, have to be specifically asked about. So in our practice, we're trying to move to a place where we include asking about this every time on every patient. If we don't ask, patients will often not disclose. Again, they think it's a supplement and a plant and natural and can't be making them sick. So you have to ask, and probably should screen everyone for it. Again, as I said, if you have alcohol patients come in also taking kratom to help with pain, you're not going to know unless you ask them specifically, are you taking supplements? Are you taking kratom or related products? Otherwise, you might not know and bad things might happen. Okay, next slide, please. What about the demographics? This is interesting. This is a little different than some other substances. It's not evenly distributed across the population. There's consistent age, sex, socioeconomic patterns that are seen across surveys and epidemiologic studies here. The data is not perfect, but this signal is strong enough to help us out. That peak use is consistently found among young and middle-aged adults, 26 to 40, by 50, dramatically decline. Not impossible, but highly unlikely. That kratom use is uncommon in adolescents compared with alcohol, cannabis, or nicotine. 60 to 70% male, which is different from other opioids, which are almost evenly distributed between men and women. And the highest use is among non-Hispanic whites, lower, and it's much lower among Black and Hispanic populations. Why is this? Why might this be? And I think it's because the marketing around kratom. Marketing is framed around energy, focus, performance, that it's helpful for useful, demanding work and fatigue. And so I think that this appeals to a certain demographic, younger men, especially white men. So, and also there might be some differential access, online vendors, smoke shops, cultural framing as a herbal supplement might be playing into this, and it also could be under-recognized or underreported in some of these groups. So it's also more common in people with a college or some college degree or some college education, and it's also more common in folks typically are employed and are residents of non-urban or semi-urban areas. So it's a little different. Again, nothing you can make a diagnosis on, but it's just interesting how the marketing probably plays into this. All right, next one, please. Okay, what about pregnancy? Kratom is marketed as being natural, derived from a plant, and but it behaves like opioids, carries the same risks, meaning that multiple case reports describe infants born with neonatal abstinence syndrome after kratom use. And we all probably know, but we'll just recover here briefly. Neonatal abstinence syndrome includes tremors, high-pitched crying, irritability, feeding problems. and often requires pharmacologic treatment. This is just code for literally IV morphine or another opioid in a newborn to kind of manage withdrawal symptoms for a week or two until it resolves. And here's the takeaway from this. It's the fetus is exposed in utero to kratom. And so this is what we want to tell our pregnant patients. If they're using kratom, you're exposing your unborn child to kratom and will lead to dependence in your unborn baby, just as with opioids. And the other point I want to make here is that stopping kratom and having withdrawal symptoms in pregnancy is in and of itself dangerous. We probably all know this. It's intuitively obvious, but it's worth saying it aloud. And when the mom is in withdrawal, the fetus is in withdrawal. That's a really important point. So as addictions medicine specialists, we want to work hard to prevent withdrawal symptoms in pregnant patients because we know that stresses the unborn child just as it stresses the mom. So we try to avoid withdrawal. There are no clinical trials. There's no standard exposure levels, and developmental outcomes of children born dependent on kratom is not known. So for all these reasons, if you have patients who are using kratom, even if they think they're doing so safely and they're pregnant, we should encourage them to avoid it. Okay, next slide, please. So I put in here a sort of a comparison of the products I've talked about: the leaf kratom, the 7-hydroxy, the pseudo, the MGM 15 and 16, sort of whether they're natural, what they do, how they function, their effects on breathing, their safety margin, their naloxone response. Someone asked about that, but you can see here that kratom is probably okay, 7-hydroxy is probably okay, pseudo probably doesn't work very well, and these newer products, it might not work at all or very little. And then the overdose ranking list goes along as you might expect. So this is a spectrum from leaf kratom, 7-hydroxy pseudo, and then MGM. One thing I want to say before we leave this topic is that at some point, a natural occurring product like kratom is no longer kratom. And for my money, once it's not a leaf anymore and it's concentrated, it's not really kratom. They can call it kratom, but it's not what it is. When we take caffeine and we take a caffeine pill, we're not drinking coffee. It's not the same thing. It's been removed from the plant. It's been chemically stressed, concentrated. It might be caffeine. It might be other things. There are other products in there, other contaminants. So taking a caffeine pill, no one would say that's the same as a cup of coffee. It's the same here. This is really, these products that are out there are no longer really kratom. The real kratom is probably still out there being bought and sold, but a lot of it is no longer kratom. It's something else. Okay, next slide. Okay, what about treatment options? The point of that, we could probably talk for the hour about this, but just to say to this large, diverse group that the treatment options are pretty much the same medications that we use for standard opioid use disorder. Buprenorphine has been shown in rats to reduce withdrawal symptoms without toxicity. The clinical evidence around using buprenorphine, Suboxone, and its other formulations for kratom use is limited to case reports. There's not really great studies out there that have studied its use and effectiveness, but those of us who practice in addiction medicine see this all the time, and we prescribe Suboxone and other naloxone or other buprenorphine products for it, and we see that it's effective. This is anecdotal. It's not been a controlled study, but it's consistent. So there's pharmacological overlap between kratom and opioids, and the efficacy of buprenorphine is pretty much established again, but just case reports. There's no studies evaluating methadone for kratom addiction. And I personally don't think that methadone should be considered as first-line treatment until those studies are available. Methadone is a different beast than buprenorphine, as we probably all know. I do think there are some practitioners who are choosing to use methadone for kratom. Usually, I believe, it's my gut sense, that in those cases, there's also co-occurring standard opiate use disorder with fentanyl, oxycodone, and other opioids that are sort of combined. If it's simply kratom, folks are probably not using methadone. So for now, buprenorphine-based treatment is the standard of care for kratom use disorder until this is more thoroughly studied. I saw a question about funding, and I'll just say that right now funding for all kinds of healthcare research is up in the air for reasons that we all understand. And the other thing I would say about funding for research in our field is if it doesn't come from the government, which right now is currently limited, it comes from the drug manufacturers. So the folks who manufacture Kratom and its chemically synthesized products, they're not funding research on how to effectively treat it. And to my knowledge, there's not a lot of money funding from the pharmaceutical industry right now, specifically about how to address this. So yeah, the research is not good right now, and I don't have any reason to be confident it's going to be better in the coming years about this product. There's just not a good way to fund the kind of research that's necessary on it. So we're going to be, like a lot of addiction medicine, flying by the seat of our pants, doing the best we can with limited information. Next slide, please. I think it's worth taking a few minutes to talk a little bit about the FDA and regulation of Kratom. It's just is an interesting story, so I hope I'll spend a few minutes talking about this. I hope you'll find it of some interest. So let's get into that part of it. In 2016, the FDA knew about Kratom back in 2008. And in 2012, they put it on their drugs and chemicals of concern list. And then in 2016, the FDA moved to try to classify Kratom as a Schedule I drug. And they did this primarily due to its opioid receptor activity. They were getting reports of adverse events and its potential for misuse. However, the pushback on the FDA was colossal, both from the public and from the, I will say, the industry that manufactures and sells these products. And so the pushback was very strong. The move to schedule, the DEA plan to schedule it, that was suspended. And it left Kratom in a federal regulatory gray zone. And it remains at that level today, at the federal level. It's in a regulatory gray zone, and it's not scheduled. It's considered a supplement, a dietary supplement, and then it's essentially unregulated. Next slide. 2017, the FDA commissioner got involved, not the DEA, declared Kratom, declared in his opinion that it was an opioid. And to me, this is important. And the FDA commissioner warned the public on its addiction, abuse, and death potential. In 2018, 44 Kratom deaths were reported. And in 2019, the Health and Human Services quietly just rescinded the scheduling recommendation after 5 years. They didn't even announce that till 2021. So the FDA, in my opinion, HHS and the FDA sort of slunk off. They backed down. Their official position is that the Kratom is an unsafe, unapproved drug and not a supplement. That's their position, but that's not actually the fact. It's remains a supplement. So in 2017, the FDA backed down, kind of focused on consumer protection and risk awareness rather than scheduling. So what they've done is issued public warnings, import alerts. They've highlighted cases of addiction. They've coordinated with the DEA to track use trends, but it's really at a federal level. It's an unregulated supplement, just like every other supplement on the shelf at your store. So next slide, please. What about CDC and poison control data? In 2022, 4 years ago already, it was implicated in 800 overdoses. And keep in mind that most overdoses are polysubstance. So it's implicated in those. And since 2022, poison control centers have seen dramatic increases in Kratom exposure reports, 2,000 in the first half of 2025 alone. It's a year later, and I wouldn't be surprised if this number continues to grow. Most deaths from overdose are, as we said, multiple substances, polysubstance, but 6.5% were Kratom as a sole intoxicant. So in other words, this is an important point. Kratom, 7-hydroxy, it's not really Kratom, but these products can be fatal even without other drugs present. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, this is a very important couple comments about the Kratom Consumer Protection Act. It was drafted in 2018 by the American Kratom Association. Someone asked a question about it. This is the key association that promotes its marketing and sales, represents the industry who imports these products and designs them. And so this organization saw the handwriting on the wall, which is that if we don't do something, the federal government's going to step in. So that was drafted by the American Kratom Association, and the provisions of this Consumer Protection Act were age restrictions that either 18 or 20-year-olds couldn't purchase it. that it had to have labeling requirements on its content, serving size, disclaimers, that it was prohibited from being mixed with other drugs, which still happens, by the way, in some states, that had to be tested for purity, contaminants, and enforcement provisions. Now, here's the thing. This Kratom consumer protection is not a federal law. It has to be state laws. It have to be adopted in each state. And so each state either does or does not adopt it or changes in some of it. And I don't know where all of you work and practice and live. Each state is different. I think Ohio has recently moved to implement some of the language, but each state can craft this as they see fit. So yeah, just looking at my notes, in Ohio, I think it's been proposed. So in Ohio, it proposed establishing safety labeling licensing, but it's not been passed yet. The Board of Pharmacy has taken some action on it, however. So there's a tension in policy. Some lawmakers see a consumer protection model, and other regulators move it toward a restrictive control. So this is being played out at the levels of our individual states, individual politicians. Okay, next slide. Next slide, please. So there's a great global Kratom coalition, which is a multi-stakeholder advocacy and education group, and its mission is to basically make sure that Kratom products, especially the natural leaf form, that they're safe, that they're accurately labeled, and they're governed by science-based regulations that protect consumers. This is not an industry trade group like the prior one that did the act. This includes researchers, clinicians, and consumers, and they also distinguish between natural Kratom leaf that we talked about and the concentrate or synthetic products. This coalition actually promotes research and engages with policymakers at the state and international level. So here's a graphical representation that may be up to date, but I wouldn't swear by it. You may have to check your individual states. That kind of outlines which states have KPCA protections and whether they're strict or lax. Some states have passed a KPCA act, but it doesn't really have any teeth in it, for example. So next slide, please. Okay, let's move on. We've consumed most of our time here. I'll try to do this last bit. We could probably talk about the Kratom for the whole hour or multiple hours, but there's another one out there called Tianeptine, which is colloquial called gas station heroin, and just like the skull and crossbones on the 7-hydroxykratom. I mean, I don't know why you would name your product gas station heroin, but there actually are ones called that. Happiness in a bottle, Neptune's Fix, Tianeptine elixir. These are unassuming products that are packaged, marketed, and sold as energy boosters. They're sold in gas stations, convenience stores, vape shops, and online. These products are not approved by the FDA, and the public has been warned not to purchase them or use them due to safety concerns. All right, next one. Next slide, please. So here's the deal with tianeptine. Tianeptine is actually a tricyclic compound. And if those of you who have a medical background, you'll know that tricyclic compounds are in a class of antidepressants that we still use today in this country. This particular one was developed outside of the US to be used as an antidepressant. It's completely synthetic. It's not a plant product. It's not a supplement. It's manufactured in a lab, in a pharmacy, in a factory. At low doses, it's involved in glutamate signaling, so it promotes stress resilience. It supposedly removes depressive symptoms, anxiety, and stress reactivity. However, at high doses, it acts like a mu receptor agonist, just like oxycodone, heroin, fentanyl, codeine, and yes, kratom. Unfortunately, this drug has a very short half-life, so it encourages redosing and rapidly leads to tolerance and severe physical dependence. It's the half-life of a lot of these things, including fentanyl, that plays a big role in their addiction potential. In other words, it acts quickly, goes away quickly, and this is what our patients feel. They have to get another dose right away. So this is a big factor in tianeptine. It also has withdrawal symptoms similar to opioid withdrawal, agitation, autonomic instability. This is what the cold chill, shivering, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, abdominal cramps, and anxiety, and even psychosis. And this is what I want to say to you about tianeptine. Despite being sold as a supplement, it behaves pharmacologically like a short-acting opioid. This is like oxycodone in a bottle. And that you can walk into a convenience store and buy this at the counter is startling, to say the least. All right, next slide, please. Poison control mortality data. We're still gathering this in about 1,000 single substance tianeptine exposures in the US in a period of 8 years, but about a 1,400% exposure increase over time. A lot of these patients actually need admission. They're so sick when they're exposed to these products and overdoses. The FDA adverse event reports include hospitalizations, life-threatening events, and several deaths due to tianeptine. The CDC data shows opioid-like toxicity, withdrawal effects, fatalities are documented in case reports and forensic series coming out of the CDC. And the limitations of this are the same with any supplement as opposed to medication. You know, medications that are produced pursuant to FDA regulations have a package insert or produced in factories and labs that are governed by the FDA. They have adverse reporting event mechanisms. We kind of know when things happen. We learn over time, not these things. They're sold online. There's no mechanism to report adverse events. We don't know how to test for them. We don't really know. We're really blind as to what's really going on out there. Next slide. So again, same thing. Tianeptine is not detected on standard drug tests. Unless you ask, it's not going to be disclosed. The withdrawal symptom is virtually identical to standard opiates, can be very severe, can be treated identically. Both buprenorphine and methadone have been reported to be effective, but there's no officially approved treatments at this time. So the key thing for treating patients who become dependent on tianeptine when they have access to it is recognize it in the first place. And that's that it doesn't show up on standard drug screens. And many patients do not think of it as a drug. So intentional screening is essential. So that's the situation with that. Sometimes the symptoms are severe. Let's see, what else should I tell you about this? There's no FDA-approved treatment protocols. So again, folks like myself working in clinics treating addiction patients, I don't want to say we're winging it, but we're doing the best we can with the tools at our disposal and the knowledge that we have. There's very few. We're not getting any guidance from anywhere. There's not really any research. So you should be aware of your state level legal changes, and the regulation is quickly evolving on this. Next slide, please. Now, to their credit, many states have just gone ahead and prohibited the sale of this products. And so unlike Kratom, I don't think there's an advocacy group out there that's trying to protect their interests. So the following states as of 2025, Alabama, Florida, Georgia, Indiana, Kentucky, Michigan, have classified as a controlled or banned substance, and they've just kind of removed it from the market. The sad thing is, in today's world, that doesn't mean folks can't get it. They can buy it online. Okay, another one mixed in here with this group. Next slide, please. There's something called Phenibut, and I had these in the order of their sort of frequency, I would say. Phenibut is another product. You got the picture there, what it looks like. Looks like regular medication, a regular medication bottle. This drug was developed in the Soviet Union as an anxiolytic, so as a drug to treat anxiety. It acts at the GABA receptor in the brain. It's sort of a synthetic GABA analog. It's just a modified form of GABA, which can cross the blood-brain barrier. So it's sold online as something called a nootropic, which, if you haven't heard this word, it's worth knowing and learning about. So these drugs, as marketed as a nootropic, are marketed to enhance cognition or mood. A nootropic is not a medical diagnosis. It's not a FDA recognized category, and drugs marketed as nootropics are supplements, other drugs, synthetic compounds. The safety, dosing, and purity of these are almost unknown. Think of nootropic as brain enhancing. That's what folks who market these drugs. This drug is not FDA approved for human use in the United States, and yet it's available online. So folks who go out there researching this or buying this product, same cautions as before. Next slide, please. We don't have a way to test for it. If folks come in dependent on it, what we can really do is reduce the dose slowly to minimize withdrawal severity and taper it. We can use baclofen and other GABA agonists in severe cases. Supportive care is a big part of it, managing anxiety, insomnia management, et cetera. So medical monitoring and behavioral support and education is really all we can offer. There's not medication for this drug. Next slide, please. In the couple minutes left, I just want to mention DXM. DXM, or dextromethorphan, is the ingredient found in over-the-counter cough and cold medicines. When sold online or purchased, these look like regular cough syrup or pills. It does relieve cough, does stop coughing, On the street, it's referred to as CCC, robe, or PP. And when taken in sufficient amounts, and a lot of our teenagers are doing this, it's an NMDA receptor antagonist, and so it produces hallucinogenic or dissociative effects. And this has led to recreational misuse, and our patients out there call this robotripping. And that's what DXM abuse looks like. It's a hallucinogen, basically. So think, PCP. Okay, next slide. So dextromethorphan toxicity is dose dependent, and it can just be mild nausea, but it can have severe neurologic and cardiovascular effects. So it's more common, bad outcomes are more common when dextromethorphan is combined with alcohol and other CNS active drugs. So this is what your ERs and your ER physicians like my former career are going to be seeing, is these folks showing up in the ED with nausea, vomiting, tachycardia, hypertension, hallucinations, dissociation, agitation, seizures, psychosis, or even death. And we don't really have a drug to treat this either. This is a drug that's managed mostly by supportive care, figuring out what they ingested, and then just providing supportive care while folks recover. Okay, so I put a summary page in here of the substances that we talked about, sort of their primary mechanism, their common use and marketing, their legal status, abuse dependence potential, withdrawal profile, and treatment consideration. I tried to summarize it in one slide if someone wanted to do this. And I put some references on here for you as well. But at this point, I think we've got a few minutes left to take some questions, if you'd like to do that.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Schmidt. We are going to go ahead with the Q&A portion of today's discussion. So feel free to drop any questions you have in the chat, and we will get to as many as we can. To kick things off, Dr. Schmidt, we have seen patients test positive for traditional illicit substances and claim it was from Kratom or similar energy-boosting drinks sold in gas stations. Is this possible from what we know?
The answer to that is it's unlikely. It's not impossible, but it's extremely unlikely. So patients often blame supplements, energy products for positive drug tests. As we all know, the immunoassay test that we use in our clinics and offices of probation officers is prone to false negative and false positives. It's not the same as mass spec or formal toxicology testing. So I can't say for sure, but here's the bottom line. Cross-reactivity can occur, but most of the time, these results, abnormal results, either represent a true drug exposure or contamination of an unregulated product. So the simple answer is that most of the time, patients have a positive test for, say, oxycodone and say, yeah, I took some gas station heroin. That's what it is. The true answer, if you send that specimen off for formal testing, is no. They either took something that had oxycodone, they either took oxycodone or fentanyl or another opioid, codeine, heroin, morphine, whatever, or they took something that was contaminated with it. So the vast majority of the times, no. Rapid testing is not being caused by these energy and supplements, Kratom, that they're taking.
Dr. Schmidt, this is a question from one of our attendees today. How would you go about educating about Kratom and similar substances without potentially opening up doors to use with patients who may have previously been unfamiliar with it?
Yeah, so that's a really tricky question. I think I would ask this question. I would turn the question on its head. Is there a safe way to use Kratom? Is it safe? Is it a safe way to use this? And my answer is that there's no evidence, no reliable evidence that Kratom can be used safely or predictably in a medical sense. The only thing I can say for sure is that there are some people who use it without immediate catastrophic harm. And that distinction really matters. So I'm not saying that every person who uses it is going to become addicted to it, but just that there's no evidence whatsoever. So think about how we think about regular medications, regular prescription medicines you might buy. We ask the question, is there a standardized dose of let's say oxycodone? Is there a standardized dose of oxycodone? Yes. Is there a standardized dose of Kratom? No, there's not. Is there regulated purity of an oxycodone pill you get from the pharmacy for your broken ankle? Yes, there is. Is there regulated purity for the Kratom you buy in a head shop? No. Is there a known therapeutic index for kratom and other substances? No. Are there controlled trials proving its safety and effectiveness for kratom? No. Does it have predictable interactions with other drugs? For kratom, no. For other medications, yes, we understand that. For pregnancy safety, has that been studied? For all other medications that we prescribe, the answer is yes. For kratom, it's no. So from a medical perspective and a regulatory standpoint, my view is that kratom cannot be considered as safe. That doesn't mean that some people aren't taking it and that they aren't getting some relief from pain or withdrawal symptoms. But this is the position that's consistent with the guidance from the U.S. Food and Drug Administration and research summary from the National Institute on Drug Abuse, that it's perceived as being safe because it's natural. Many users do experience some subjective pain relief and withdrawal symptoms. But it doesn't mean it's safe to do so. And the fact that an individual hasn't had a catastrophic complication doesn't mean that it can be used safely. So yeah, I do think that we need to ask about it. If we're going to ask every single patient if they take supplements and kratom, then we're going to have to be prepared to answer these questions about it, because they're going to come up, because they're going to say, well, what's kratom? Or I've heard about it. And so we have to be the sources of solid information and present it that way, that there's no evidence. Just because not everyone has catastrophic complications does not mean it's safe for you to take to manage pain or withdrawal. That's a very subtle distinction, but I think that's the right way to think about it. Hope that's responsive.
Dr. Schmidt, how long is kratom detectable through lab urine screens, and is there a difference between the different variations?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And so the kratom product is detectable by again, it's on our quick tests. We're not going to detect it at all on formal toxicology. It's highly variable and depends on how it's been using. It remains detectable in the body for several days. With chronic daily use, it's longer, but the exact duration is unclear. So we think, for example, that if it's an occasional user, it'll be detectable in their urine for 1 to 3 days. We think that if it's a regular user, but not a heavy user, that will be detected in formal toxicology 3 to 5 days. And a heavy chronic daily user might be up to a week detectable in a formal toxicology. Now, some of these the MGM, the 708, the pseudo, we really don't know, because as I said, even testing for these is not widely available. So I think the answer is I don't know. We're not really sure. As I said, our lab at BrightView tests for kratom, but not for the other synthesized products. So I don't even have personal experience to share with you on that. So we think a heavy user up to a week, but whether it's the same for these highly synthesized components, it's really hard to know. And honestly, this is going to sound crazy to say, but this is what I love about addiction medicine, is that it's a brand new form of medicine. It's a brand new specialty. It's evolving very rapidly. And the answer to this important question will become clear in the next couple of years as we go along. As I give this talk in the coming years, some of these answers will have clear answers. And that's what I like about it. It's constantly evolving, constantly changing, and it makes it interesting work, at least for me. It makes it a little harder for those of you out there in the field, I know, but for me, it makes it interesting work. So thanks for that question. It was a good one.
Dr. Schmidt, is kratom fat soluble?
That's a really good question. And I don't believe it is. I don't believe my best understanding of the physiology and the pharmacodynamics is it's not stored in fat. So it's rapidly absorbed in the gut, it's excreted in the urine, and it's not stored in the fat. And that explains why even for heavy users, it'll be gone within a week. If you think about cannabis, for example, it is fat soluble, it's stored in fat. And so that's why a heavy daily user of cannabis might have positive drug tests for 60 days, even typically a month, but 60 days, because it's slowly released from the fat. And this is another important point about fentanyl. Why is fentanyl so difficult to treat? And one of the reasons is, unlike other opioids, fentanyl is lipophilic and stored in the fat and slowly released. And this dramatically affects how it impacts people. But yeah, to the best of my knowledge, no, kratom is not lipophilic, it's not stored in fat, isn't slowly released from fat. Gets into your bloodstream, goes to your brain, other organ systems, and is rapidly filtered out of your urine.
think we've got a little bit more time for one last question, Dr. Schmidt. Do you know or can you tell us anything about where Kratom products are coming from? Are these manufactured by big companies or is it more small business? Are they overseas suppliers? Is there anything you can share?
Yeah, I think it's the latter two. This is not major, to the best of my knowledge, from my reading on the subject, this is not the Procter and Gamble of the world. These are small companies, small importers and distributors who have formed together to form this trade association. And so these are largely overseas companies that are very opaque. We know very little about them. They're formed overseas. They're making these products. They're importing them into the country as supplements. Now, where the manipulation of the chemistry goes on, is that occurring either here in the country from kratom leaves or outside the country? I'm not 100% sure. It's a really good question. I'll do a little research on it, try to answer that. But no, these are small companies. Nonetheless, I mean, if 20 million people have tried kratom and at any point, these are no longer small companies, but I believe they're mostly offshore and taking advantage of the fact that kratom is perceived as being natural and a supplement and therefore not subject to the rules of the FDA, of HHS, of the DEA yet. So yeah, they're kind of skirting the rules, but I believe they're mostly small to medium-sized companies that are manufacturing, collecting, drying, concentrating, and then importing these products for sale into the US.